Mirë mbrëma të gjithëve, miq, zonja ministre, të ftuar, mirë se keni ardhur. Well, good evening, all guests, dear minister, friends, diplomatic mission. We're very excited to organize this meeting in Gjirlatësit in Durrës. And we are very excited for one big reason, because we're not sure it will happen till it's today because of the COVID situation. And as you'll see, we'll have a lot of friends who will be on the Zoom and are following through Zoom. We think it's a great moment because it's not a conference. I think it's a gathering of hearts and minds. And we thought that nobody could do it better than us here in Durrës. So I want to thank all of you for coming and for contributing. So very few words about who is organizing it. This is the brainchild of a group of people, which I'm very honored to know lately, Richard, Wolfgang, and Rudy. And together we thought of creating something called Advantage Tourism, about a tourism which is meaningful, a tourism which is sustainable. And we decided to do it in Albania because Albania is becoming the star lately, but Albania in a way brings together all the Western Balkan countries. And we decided to do it right now because we want to celebrate life. And we think that this is a celebration of life, of us getting together, and regardless of the ebbs and the flow of life, we know how to live, how to celebrate. If you ask me today what it will be the aim of the conference, I say definitely we don't expect us to be wiser tomorrow evening, but definitely more informed, and I think having bonded together and creating opportunities. So I was not actually believing the fact that this is the United Nations. There's exactly 26 nationalities here today. And I think this very fact deserves a big applause. And that's a way to take my emotions as well away. Because as I told my team, the Landways, which is supporting the whole thing, I said, this is like our own wedding. So here we go. I'm very pleased to give the floor to a friend, to somebody who's considered an intellectual, who loves not only books and writing, but lacks action. She has been the Minister of Culture, and now she is the Minister of Tourism. Her Excellency Mirela Kumbaro. She is now leading a very important ministry for Albania, that of tourism and environment, which shows the focus of the Albanian government on these two very important aspects. So without further ado, I give the floor to the minister. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, tourism and the environment, not half without the other half. I'm not known as a protocol person, so I'm going directly to say, dear friends. Friends that I know before and friends from tonight. Thank you for inviting me. More than a minister, as a friend, because I always thought that tourism is not something done by the ministers or by the administration. Tourism is the merit of the private sector, and it's our duty as authority, as government, as ministry, as administration to support. Because for the Albanian government is one or maybe the most important branch of the economy. And it was since the beginning of this third mandate of our government declared as a priority for Albania, tourism and the environment, both. So I guess, and you guess, you can guess how this portfolio is important, but is a kind of the carrefour between different sectors, between different different of the story, different sides of the story. I would like anyway to take this opportunity to welcome you to Albania, or to welcome you also in this part of Albania, and to express also my satisfaction that the Landways International, old friends and new partners, as one of the largest tour operators, has organized this meeting. I agree with you that it's not a conference, it's a meeting between collaborators, partners, and friends. Tourism is really grown up in Albania, and Albania is becoming an important point of this activity in the Western Balkans. The fact that we are here in Movenpick Hotel in Giri Lalzit was incredible and not imaginable some years ago. And this is only one of the places that we have in Albania now. And during the last 5 years, the biggest difficulty that we have, or that the visitors can have, is the difficulty of the choice. Personally, it is with immense appreciation that I welcome delegates, partners of this meeting to our shores, our ground. Here we witness the merger of our two main branches of tourism, namely leisure and business, but as well as members of the specialty tourism sectors, who are so precious to a minister of tourism. The Albanian tourism sectors has matured over the last years, and we have experienced much progress. For the past 8 years, Albania has served as the ideal traditional sun and sea. But it's not anymore the case. It's much more than sun and the sea. And our specialty is more and more not to have only 3 months of tourism from June to August, but to go behind and from 3 months to reach 12 months of tourism. Because the Albanian specialty is to have in a such small country, in the same time, in half hour, 1 hour of trip, the sea and the mountain, the snow and the sun. So, but to have on the same basket the culture heritage. As a former Minister of Culture, twice, in the first and in the second mandate, I used to deal all the time with the culture tourism, which was, and it is, one of the biggest attraction during the rest of the year, apart the sea and the sun. And not only this, we think that we have this original side of the tourism, which is the ecotourism, with the rivers, even with the last wide river of Europe, as our Vjosa River is called. You can just test, Google Vjosa River, and you will see how Vjosa is considered by the visitors. But nowadays we are seeing a shift from the traditional source to a widest possible range of source of tourism, including a healthy mix of tour operator clients and independent visitors. And which means that a big national strategy for tourism has already established, and now we are on the first step to implement this strategy, not only by the ministry, with with the private sector, with the tour operators, with the accommodation structures, and more the high-level tourism offered by hotels like Movenpick. This is not only because the tourism has been developed, but also because the government has set up fiscal facilities for this kind of hotels. This is why I would say that the secret behind this success is the policy, is the governmental strategy to help and to support the development of the high-level hotels and tourism. The biggest investment that we have done in the last years and that we are planning in this mandate that we have started since 3 months are infrastructure serving the tourism sector, airports, roads, ports for marina. This is the new profile of the big investments that we are planning or starting or going, that are ongoing in Albania. This is why we have planned and we are pretending that within the 10 next year to become the champion of the tourism in the Balkans. Even because Albania is not yet discovered or is not yet known or well known. This is why I think, and I want to thank everybody who has organized this meeting, this friendly meeting, and who is also host or visitors on these round tables. Because I think that everybody who is coming for the first time in Albania and is going back should talk about Albania by feeling, not by figures. I'm talking about on behalf of my government, and we are talking with figures. For example, we had 6 million visitors in 2019, foreign visitors. And in 2020, it was a difficult year for everybody. But in 2021, till the end of October, we had 5.1 million visitors, more than expected, which means that the next year, it will be the boom. So we have started now to work for the preparation of the next season of tourism. And in my mind and in the mind of my team, the season will not start in summer, but the 1st of March, because the first tourists are coming on this period. And on the other side, talking about COVID issues, we have everything under control, and we will keeping like this. So I don't want to talk too much, even because I think that a minister is not interested in this speech when he's talking as minister. I will be here with you for a little bit, maybe to answer if you have a question. But at the end of my speech, short one, I would add something also. The old Albanian constitution, centuries ago, said something which is really important for our philosophy of tourism. This old constitution said that for an Albanian, the home belongs to the goat and to the friend, to the host. So be our friend and welcome home in Albania. Thank you.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you very much for your positivity you brought to the audience. And I'm very, very convinced that even the bad weather cannot dull the feeling of this room. And I think in your address, you beautifully spoke about the emotions, not only about the rational side. And this is why we brought this gathering today, where we have you, we have experts and people from the private sector. Thank you. And at the end of the speech, we will have questions from the audience. So I'm very pleased now to have a friend who hails from Australia but lives in München, Richard Adam, which represents and is the owner of Trend Transfer Asia. And we all agree that tourism before COVID was not perfect. There were a lot of things to be done, but we think that we can do it better right now. And Richard is an expert in tourism. He is an entrepreneur. He has been running hotels. So we'll hear from somebody who not only conceives and has things to say and advice, but somebody who has really done the right thing. So Richard, without further ado, the turn is yours. Thank you.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm very honored and privileged to be here. And after Ghazi's introduction, it's better I don't say anything anymore because I can only spoil it now. Thank you very much. It's true, the only nationality I have is Australian, but I live in Germany for the last 30 years, so I didn't come all the way from Australia. But anyway, when I came here for the first time to Tirana yesterday, when you touch down, it's very impressive. And I think, wow, there must be unlimited potential. By the way, can anybody cope with my English? Who can understand me, right? Who can understand me at all? And who doesn't care anyway what I'm saying? Okay. Thank you. It's unlimited potential, but then again, to leverage unlimited potential, there is always work to do. And this is my approach, and it's not always to my benefit because some people hate me for it, some people love me for it, because I try to put the finger into the wound where there is work to do. And as I've been here to Albania for the first time, of course, I do have an outside view and not an inside view, which may have some benefits and may have some pitfalls that there are a couple of things I may not know. But anyway, there is work to do, lifts me to the little topic of that presentation, because tourism wasn't perfect prior to the pandemic either. Also, sometimes when you move around in the tourism community, let's say in late 2019, you see people clapping on each other's shoulders all the time, simply believing after 20 years of growth that the world is perfect. And I would say the world is, many times the world is created very well and very good, but it's never perfect, and there is never the moment where you can't improve things. So what I mean with basically, yeah, I hope you can read this because I cannot read it from here. So I have to turn around a little bit, give you a couple of experiences why the world wasn't perfect prior to the pandemic in tourism. We had inexpensive airfares and growth for 20 years, but the average of spending per trip on a global scale didn't grow. So basically per trip, people were spending less and less money. That's an interesting figure because inflation and all these kind of things hasn't been covered by the tourism spending. Another aspect which I think is very important is that popular places have lost authenticity. The more and more look the same, the more and more they became, let's say, absorbed by tourism. And tourism destination management and development has actually reduced itself more and more to tourism promotion. Promotion isn't management. Promotion is just holding a flag out in the market. I've been in that industry for the last 30 years, so I know tourism people like to go to trade fairs and do promotion, but many of them forget about doing their homework. And in today's world of digital advocacy, promotion and demand becomes more and more a spurious relationship. The actual demand comes from crowd intelligence, which is based on advocacy of people who have been to a place. And if you cannot win the word of mouth momentum, then promotion is a waste of money. You cannot compensate. That's a personal opinion. Many things I say is a personal opinion, and you decide whether that makes sense or not. The next thing is visitor numbers has been the primary key indicator over the last 20 years. We talk about visitor numbers, but is that what we actually want to achieve? In reality, we want to achieve welfare, economic development, social improvement. But then when we count visitor number, where do we see whether we are getting anywhere? Every company has its KPIs, depends on their strategic direction they're heading. In public tourism, we have visitor numbers that don't say anything regarding to the contribution of welfare. And I think this is a core issue. And if this is the only message I can leave here in this evening, then it's really worth being here. I hope it's at least one of them. Over the last 20 years in tourism, we had created volume before value. And climate change and ethical aspects require consequences. Now let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Okay, this is backwards, this is forwards. I figured that out now. A small and simple model, according to Albert Einstein, if you can't explain something in simple words, you haven't understood it well enough. So this is a personal small model. What makes a healthy and viable tourist positioning? Number one, it's attractiveness. Of course, a place has to be attractive. But number two, it's retention and advocacy. If you spend a lot of money to attract one visitor to come to your place, and probably you have spent more money than he actually leaves at a place. If you don't manage to make him an advocate that he goes home and said, this is the place to be, or that he comes again, then the whole business model of tourism will collapse if you don't create retention and advocacy. And of course, the third aspect is sustainability, because tourism cannot consume the resources it's based on. So that's an obvious issue that will become more and more relevant. But what we mean with that, we come to that in the next 2 hours of my presentation. I just wanted to find out whether you're closely listening. Okay, sometimes that little bit of nasty expression comes into place, which is called mass tourism, excess tourism, over tourism, crowded places. It can happen. There are places also in the Western Balkans where this is an issue. To me personally, there is no such thing as over tourism. If you have over tourism, you have given away something too cheap. And over tourism, wherever it happens, can be an excellent way to generate additional social welfare. But that's just a little sidekick, because we see that term over tourism. To me, over tourism is just that you haven't channeled or leveraged additional demand into social welfare. I know this is an expensive, this is a difficult or a dangerous statement. It's not just going into a tourism ripoff. You can do it in a more smart way, and maybe we have the possibility to discuss this over the last 2 days. Otherwise, I get lost if I go into that too much. What are the drivers of attractiveness? It's basically two things. A place has to be relevant for certain need, for certain interest groups, for certain expectations. Some tourism places think they can generate a demand if they get well known enough. They do big promotion aspects and tourism promotion all over the world. If you look at it closer and more critically, they all tell you the same thing. They all tell you the same thing. If you take away the headlines, tourism promotion for countries, everything tells you the same thing. We have vibrant places, great culture, great heritage. What else? Good food and beautiful nature. They all tell you the same thing. You have to create relevance, not awareness, relevance, that when people come to your place, to Albania, with this particular interest, no other place in the world can serve this interest better than Albania. But that's a different narrative than the old school tourism promotion we are kind of seeing all over the world. It's always the same. And the next aspect that drives attractiveness is identity. You have to maintain your own identity. And this is a dangerous thing. In an emerging phase, let's say brands, Mövenpick, whatever, have tremendous benefit. They introduce standards, they leverage the professionalism, they build trust in the marketplace. But then again, there can be a point when a place consists out of franchises. People may think, why should I go there? I have my Starbucks at home, I have my McDonald's at home, I have my this and just hotel chain around the corner. So there is a thin line of finding out where external, let's say, credibility is helpful, and where you have to switch to build your internal authenticity. In an emerging phase, that makes a lot of sense, but we see places on the planet where they start to kick out these traditional brands, where we need some local authenticity in order to have our own assets, why people should come here. So it's a thin line. Retention and advocacy. Your future tourism retention and advocacy is not based on the promotion you do. Your future in tourism is based on what people experience when they come here, because this is the currency of truth. And you cannot manipulate this. You can do a little bit of fine-tuning when it comes to social communication, but basically you cannot manipulate this. But at the end, it's the visitor experience that defines in the market, I call it swarm intelligence, whether you're successful or not. And if you don't cope with that, then you might as well save your money for the promotion and put it into quality initiatives. Okay, and the next aspect is, and that's actually the core message, is sustainability. We know, or at least we experience with all the discussions about climate change and these kind of things, that sustainability is reduced on environmental issues, but that's far from the actual concept. Sustainability has an economic aspect and it has a social aspect, and there is some discussions in science that also it has a cultural aspect. The cultural aspect may be too complicated for myself as well. Let's concentrate on these established things. How do you monitor and how do you see and how do you steer and manage your sustainability? And this comes back to my first entry statement. How do you monitor and make your sustainability transparent if you only count visitor numbers? It's not possible. Just because visitor numbers is the easiest numbers that the most stupid people can communicate among each other doesn't mean it's the central indicator for measuring tourism. You have to put visitor numbers in an additional context. For example, the salary in corporate tax in relation to visitor numbers. How much jobs does it create? What's the regional value chain? What's the carbon footprint per visitor numbers? local welfare, the contribution. Now you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Science is working for ages to have built this kind of indicators, and we have a very well advanced system. 2 weeks ago, I've been in a panel only with scientists where I had more or less this kind of similar message, because I'm a missionary of that message for the last 20 years. Stop your visitor number counting because it doesn't tell you anything. Science have that toolbox, but the industry and science, to me, sometimes it looks like there is no interface. The industry needs to pick this up in a way that creates dynamic, so you actually know where you're going to, because when you drive a car, you have also other indicators, directions, and not just the speed. A little example, and then I hope you can read this. It looks almost readable. I didn't know how it looks when it's blown up. I got this data together. You see here, when you start collecting inbound numbers and creating the ratio inbound and the population and the GDP tourism, suddenly the tourism, the GDP contribution of tourism suddenly becomes a completely different mindset, where you immediately see visitor number probably don't mean much. And the GDP tourism, you only find out when you put other parameters in combination with visitor numbers. Now I did an even further exercise, because this is an official statistic. I mean, you can have all these charts. We find a way that these charts can be downloaded, so don't bother to make any notes. I go even further. I took some of these numbers. I only had it for these 3 countries: Albania, Montenegro, and Slovenia. The numbers are taken from official sources. So whether the numbers are correct or wrong, I don't know. I can promise that I wrote them, I copied them correctly. This I can promise, from official sources. And we have a couple of key figures here. Tourism intensity, which is the beds per 1,000 inhabitants. Albania the tourism intensity has grown 230% between 2015 and 2019. In Montenegro, the tourism intensity has decreased in 5 years 25%. And in Slovenia, it has only grown 11.65%. It's the same with density, beds per square kilometer. In Montenegro, it has decreased 24%. In Albania, it has increased 197%. But when it comes to growth of employment rate in tourism, Albania had the biggest growth, 304% in 5 years, but Montenegro also, the capacity has decreased. The employment of tourism has also decreased 218%. You see, you find out a lot of things if you go beyond the visitor numbers. And when it comes to GDP in let's say, in hard currency, this is per inhabitant in 100 US dollars. Again, here, Montenegro has an increase of 34%, and Albania has an increase of 49%. Even they have decreased their capacity, if the numbers I wrote down are correct. Okay, what I'm trying to say here, and this is almost a wrap up, you have to see this vicious circle, attractiveness, which is based on retention and advocacy, and the hard currency is what visitors actually experience and not what you tell people in the promotion. You have to be persistent in that kind of communication thing. If you have over-tourism or not, it doesn't matter, but if you have it, when some people say, oh, I wish I would have that problem with over-tourism. I know that only it's applicable for very, very little very few destinations. But once you have it, it's an opportunity to raise money for social welfare because there are consequences. Land rise, centrifugal forces, a lot of consequences here. But at the end, it's the KPIs to measure and steer, monitor, and the development and to proactively balance of interests. And if you don't have these KPIs in place, you don't know where to go. You don't have a navigation system in tourism development in place. And this is basically the end of my message. The real visitor experience will define the advocacy, nothing else. Therefore, the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of a low price is forgotten. Resources to be focused on value creation and placemaking and on needs of visitors and locals. Therefore, the visitor experience is the relevant currency of sustainability in tourism. Attractiveness defined by crowd intelligence and not by your tourism promotion stuff. Visitor becomes more aware of sustainability. They actually make their decisions based on aspects. Where is the lowest carbon footprint if I go to certain places? This was defines tourism flows. Places have to be maintained authenticity and identity. Otherwise, people don't have a reason to go there. People don't come here for a Starbucks. They come here for Albanian authenticity or for Western Balkan authenticity. And in destination and relevant business units, higher demand of executives with proven experience in development need to be involved, and not only the promotional guys who go from trade fair to trade fair. You need value creators and not promoters in the first place. And in post-pandemic, there will be even more relevant because people get afraid of crowds. Some people come traumatized whenever they face crowds. They become insecure and maybe scared away. Last chart, retention and advocacy is more effective in domestic and neighboring source markets, of course. So healthy tourism organizations have a healthy local source market, domestic and surrounding corner. That's why Western Balkan have even a better position if you leverage also the potential that is within Western Balkan. Oops. We've talked about the price tag over tourism. Mass excess or over tourism only remains a problem as long as value is given away too cheap. Again, drain of capital out of local tourism profits. Real estate franchises needs to be reduced. If you need want an investment here, you only want to you also want to have the profits reinvested and not go out of the country. It's easier said than done. I'm aware of that. And a set of KPIs beyond visitor numbers is needed to balance economic, social, and ecological interest. So that was my basic message. I've asked so many people, about 3 to 4 people today, what thank you mean in Albanian language. They all were polite and told me, unfortunately, I forgot it again, so I have to say it in my own language. Thank you very much for your attention. I would have loved to say it in Albanian language, but
very simple fact, we have more and more older, or I would say best ages, tourists. So we have less young people who want to go to the beach for volleyball and one-night stands. And we have more people who want to go here for culture. And I think it's very fortunate, if I may say so, to have a Minister of Tourism who is a culture person, because so you're not running down this avenue, all we need is more highways and then everything will be wonderful. So this is, I think you're immune from such kind of thinking, and which is very good for Albania, I'm sure. So you have more people who have more specific needs. And tomorrow we have one of the panels about niche markets, which is a very good thing, because if you want to have, and you need to have, not 3 months a year tourism, but 12 months a year tourism, also to create full-time jobs, also to make jobs more attractive in tourism. One of the results of pandemic is that a lot of people have been running away from the industry and found out, well, for the same money, I can get a Monday, Friday, 9 to 5 job where I don't have to work on the weekend. I don't have to work during holidays. And they're not coming back. So one part of the story is also to have better jobs. But for better jobs, you need less seasonality. If it's highly seasonal, it's not easy to create full-time jobs for 12 months a year. So we see more development of more diverse needs. So, and I think one of the big changes in the mind of the whole industry, of all of us, is not to think about tourism as holiday. So there was a time when people needed the time to rest their limbs because they were working hard with their body. But most of your customers, most of your visitors, what are they doing normally in their life? They sit in front of a computer and the only muscles they need are the muscles in their fingers. So, and hopefully the brain. What we have now is not the need for recreation in a bodily sense, but what you need is input, is experiences, is new ideas, new things you come across. So that is changing tourism anyway, away from this, okay, we put you in a nice hotel and there's a nice beach and enough to drink and a sandy beach and everything is fine. So we see the splitting of tourism. There's more luxury tourism, and you are having now more 5-star places like this one. You need also the people who can afford it to think that's nice to come here. Health tourism, of course, with folks getting older, they also are more interested in a healthy life, but also in repairing the results of their unhealthy life before. And Richard mentioned this already, authenticity. And this is something where the uniformity of inner cities and the uniformity of beach resorts and so on has been walking in the wrong direction. People say, okay, if I want to see a Starbucks, as Richard said, I can stay home. I don't have to come here to see a Starbucks. They look all the same all over the world. So traditional cultures that you want to find out about traditions. And this is all over the world that a lot of this has been destroyed already, but fortunately a lot is also still there, but you have to give value to it. So as a way to let this traditional cultures survive, but also of course, if you can say, okay, this is something you can make money with, you can sell, like you sell sunshine, well, not today, but most of the time, sunshine and fresh air, then it will be easier to keep traditional cultures alive. And of course, nature-based activities. So one of the results of the pandemic certainly is that people are saying, okay, I have to come closer to nature and maybe away from crowds. And special interest travel. So a lot of people have special interest, I don't know, bird photography. I know a lot of people, they spend all their holidays going to different countries to take photos of birds, which are only in this country, and millions of other things. So we have less of the sun and sea, and in the industry it's called 3S. I'll let you guess what this third S stands for. But also you have more competition with other parts of the world as travel has become cheaper. So if you only sell a beach, you're competing with all the other beaches in the world. And for many markets outside of Europe, there are nice beaches closer to where they live than to come to here. So it has to be more than that if you want to have also people spending money and coming here specifically, not just because it's the closest thing. So we see there is a change in demand, and of course there's also more and new markets. And when I look at the Western Balkans, and I have to say, well, I've been traveling myself here since what, 45 years? starting to hitchhike down the autoputs in Yugoslavia and also coming to the coast many, many times. So I think there is something which Richard called arrival numbers, and I would call this the trap of low price, medium quality, seasonal coastal leisure tourism, so that you have a lot of people coming here, but some people come here because it is not so expensive compared to other places, which is very dangerous because how do you get quality and prices up in that case? So, and that means going from the quantity KPIs, the arrivals numbers, to quality. So how long are people staying? So if we have half the number of arrivals staying double the time, that will be much better. They will spend more money. It will be environmentally much better. Seasonality, I mean, this is the elephant in the room. So as long as you accept, okay, we have in summer, we are overflowing and we have jobs for everybody, but in wintertime we have not. So place like this, you have obviously look around, very nice conference center. So we have to bring people here to come here for the conferences. So that is already, I think, a good idea that you have in such a place, a conference center. Not every beach resort has something like that. So, but this is a key point to have different kinds of tourism which takes place and can take place when the sun is not shining and the water is not warm enough for swimming. And of course, satisfied customers. So the word of mouse, which now has been added to, is the word of mouse, computer mouse. So we call it WOM square, WM square, word of mouse and word of mouse. This is the key thing. And the more people are connected with their smartphones and their Instagram and whatever, so the more and more you cannot avoid that people talk about the good experiences and the bad experiences they have at a place. So your official advertisement can fight less and less against it. So if you do that, you can, so the goals and so what is the purpose of the whole thing is improve the brand image by this kind of activities and the diversification and in the end arriving at higher yields. So I have some very bad news for you. This place in 30 years, maybe in 40 years, will be underwater. We will not be sitting here anymore in 40 years. So we are not very far away from the sea level, and the sea level will rise, or at least during storms, the water will come here. And in the summertime, you will have heat waves where it will be 50 degrees, too hot to go to the beach. So that doesn't mean we should not earn money and make people happy from these facilities for the next couple of decades. But in the long run, beach tourism will be stopped by climate change. And we all know that unfortunately the news is, even if from tomorrow morning we all have much better environmental policies, that will mean that in 40 or 50 years it starts to get better. But the next couple of decades it will get worse. Nothing can change this. So this is something we have to keep in mind. And one example is, so I've been working with the Maldives, and they, of course, have nothing but this. Even now, if you look at CNN, there's a lot of advertisement now from the Maldives, and they talk about you can go to the Maldives to learn how to cook fish the Maldivian way, how to dance Maldivian traditional dances, which they invented last year. And they don't talk about anymore about snorkeling with the colorful fishes and stuff, because people went there, they did this one time, they don't see a need to come back. So even the Maldives are now telling people we have something else than beach tourism. And of course, Albania and the whole Western Balkan region, not only have mountains, but we have so much history from the Greeks and the Romans and the Crusaders and the Ottomans. And so I don't have to tell you that. You know that better than me. So there's so much history and culture to offer instead. And of course, the sooner you start with this, the better. So in advantage tourism, we have coined this phrase of meaningful tourism. So that means sustainability, and it means experiences between the guest and the host. And this is, I think, the key positive message from my side would be Albanians and people in the Western Balkan are famous for being hospitable. And I have to say, from my personal experience, I can fully support that. And this is the key thing, and will become more and more important in tourism, is that you're not going to the beach away from the local people in an all-inclusive resort where you don't meet any locals, but the encounter between guests and hosts. This is more and more the key thing. Why are you traveling to another country? To meet the people there and to look at the monuments and the buildings and so on. But this will be the key thing. And if you have a culture of hospitality, this is the best base for tourism development. And so compared to other countries, the Western Balkan has not yet been so Starbuckized and Disneyfied than other places, which you can say, oh, this is a sign of underdevelopment. But this is a big bargaining chip for you. This is what you can sell, because there's more local tradition, the wild rivers you mentioned, still here, which has been destroyed in many other places a long time ago. So, and this is what people more and more are looking for. And you have all this in a small place, in an accessible place. So that's a very good base to create something which goes beyond bringing people to the beach for a low price. Finally, so I'm the China guy. I spent my whole life in working with China and with tourism. And so we have been talking, of course, also about this as a new source market. And tomorrow we have one panel where we will talk more about this. And we have Mr. Wang Minye from China here, who is, of course, also an expert on this. So from a Chinese point of view, in the Western Balkans, you have about 20 million people living here in the Western Balkans, 6 countries. This is less than the population of Shanghai. Shanghai has 25 million. So from a Chinese point of view, this is one region. And for Chinese people to make a big difference between Montenegro and Albania and Serbia is difficult on the map. It's one little dot on the map. So, so this is something where certainly if you can work together and not against each other, like you have in many regions, so you can become a very attractive destination for all seasons, because Chinese tourists do not come here for the beach. So Chinese people, they want to go to the beach. They don't do much, but if they want to go to the beach, but there's Bali and there's Jeju Island and there's Vietnamese coastline, a lot of places which are much closer. So, but there's a lot of special interest things you can offer here, and where you can say, okay, we are the best in the world for some specific things. We can together identify and then say, okay, for this, let's be the best in the world, and then get also people from emerging source markets here. Because for these new products, you need new target markets, source markets. And this can be new countries like China, or the now very successfully this year, I was told, the Arab world, the Middle East. But also within your traditional markets, new target groups, so that more, let's say, from the German market, so more culturally interested couples in their 50s and 60s who do not come here for the beach, but who come here because they're interested in the Ottoman Empire history or whatever. So that is, I think, one way where Albania has not been moving very fast, but where I see there's a good opportunity, and I'm happy to hear that also from the government side, from the ministry, and from the Madam Minister, there is thinking into this direction. So to sum up, and this is the original title of my presentation, Western Balkan, putting it on a tourism map, diversity and similarity and differences all together. So there is a diversity of culture. Of course, I'm aware that the Albanian culture is different from the Serbian culture, obviously. So you have a lot of different things, but having a common umbrella, a brand image of Western Balkan as one region, with then a lot of different things inside, this is what is needed. And so this is a common vision going beyond holiday and combining the glorious past of bygone centuries with the young and innovative spirit of today. And this is something, when I was here the first time, I said, wow, let's bring young, urban Chinese startup guys. There are millions of them. And they wear a black pullover and they drink latte macchiato and craft beer, just like the people here. So this is a place where you can meet startup guys, can meet local startup guys. So the combination of history and the innovative spirit, you can clearly feel here that this will have to get a meaningful and a sustainable tourism. That's all from me. And I wish all of you a fruitful and enjoyable meeting and also conference. And again, Ghazi, thank you very much for all the support in bringing me here.
Well, thank you, Wolfgang, for the presentation. And I think it is a record today because you're almost on time. And what I learned is that when academics work with practitioners, they start to behave. Thank you. It is a record today because you're almost on time. And what I learned is that when academics work with practitioners, they start to behave. Thank you. But I think you really made us look at the stark picture of what's happening today and care about the environment, about climate, and what's happening. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce the next keynote speaker, who, and I'll use an oxymoron, is the most humble big investor in the Balkans. He is the president of Blessed Investment. The company is very active in advising, in energy, in financial institution, in consulting. And that gentleman brings together all the good elements of the best traits of businessmen in the region and the best of Albanian businessmen. So I'm very pleased to bring here my very good friend and partner, Besnik, who will talk about the public-private view of investment in tourism in the Western Balkans. Besnik, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Ghazi. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here and to speak to such impressive audience. But first, I would like to thank you, the minister, for her presence today and very nice speech. And I know you are busy. You have other activities to follow. So whenever you would like to leave, you are free.
Well, if you would allow the minister to depart, because she has a very important meeting in Tirana at 8 o'clock. So if I can invite you for a big applause. And if you excuse me for 2 minutes, then I'll need to walk her out.
Just one word.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I don't deserve the applause, but for you, it is the first time in Albania.
Yes.
Yes. You know, sometimes it's so difficult to take the decision to come for the first time in Albania. But the most important and the most difficult decision is to leave Albania. So believe me.
So after such distinguished speakers, it's very difficult to add something interesting, but I will stick more to the facts, and probably I will be even criticized by the previous speakers, because some of the arguments that they were in a way bringing and let's say new approaches to the new strategy of developing the tourism, not only in our region, but also worldwide. But since we are a region after a long history of communism, and especially Albania, which has been isolated for many years, we need to do some of these, investments which in other regions probably are overdone in a way. So I will start since I was asked to speak about the investments and the potential cooperation of public and private in the Western Balkans. I will initially talk about the region overall. So first question that a potential investor coming from other regions would make is why to invest in the Western Balkans? What is different? I would say nothing is different from other regions of the world, but the combination of different elements make it different from other regions of the world. It was mentioned here by Professor Wolfgang that Shanghai has more inhabitants than the entire region. But I doubt that in Shanghai alone, you can find all these different elements that you find in the Western Balkans. And I'm mentioning some of them. These are quick developing countries with impressive growth, even though different speeds. The coastline that we have commented, but of course the natural habitats with very high mountains and wild rivers, biodiversity. We have lagoons, so people can come and take photo of different birds and species. Then we have the cultural heritage. This region is blessed by a long history and tradition of different civilizations. Just to mention some of the UNESCO World Heritage sites like Butrint. When you visit Butrint, south of Albania, you could see the signs of different civilizations, starting from Hellenic period, Roman period, Venetian, Ottomans, up to today. Then another important element is the access to the region. We are very close to the major European cities, especially by air. Let's say all the distances are between 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours from all major centers in Europe. But not only that, airports or cities like Belgrade and Tirana now are very well connected with direct flights, even with other regions and other continents from Asia, Middle East. It was mentioned even earlier that this year we have experienced a great flux of tourists coming from Middle Eastern countries. Not less important is the culture and tradition of great hospitality, which is a sort of common denominator in all the Western Balkans. And Albania, of course, has a very specific history in that. Not last but not least is the favorable government policies for foreign investment. So all the countries are, let's say, open societies, and they are welcoming foreign investors. They have different policies. We will touch base that, which is not necessarily a good thing, but at least they are all open to foreign direct investments. Some figures, which I know that the professor will not be, will not agree 100% with that, which is the number of tourist arrivals. As we can see here, there is a strong growth in the last years all over the region, but especially in Albania. Also, in terms of the tourism as a sector contribution to GDP, you can see that especially in Albania, Montenegro, and Croatia, this is above 20% of the GDP. And if we see the growth, let's say, let's take from 2018 to 2019, all of them, with exception of North Macedonia, are above 5% growth in terms of tourism contribution on GDP. These are some figures about the investment plans in the tourism sector. And you can see the differences between countries. What is immediately visible is that in terms of public investment, Croatia has by far a larger number, and probably this is related to the fact that Croatia is already a EU member, so they have access to EU funds in terms of public investment. Impressive also is Montenegro with regards to private investment forecast. In a way, I don't know how this relates with the table that we saw from Richard, that they were decreasing the number of the beds. Probably it's a cyclical thing. So we explained in a way why to invest in tourism in Western Balkans. But in order to invest, there need to be some necessary conditions for attracting, for allowing the investors to perform their investment. So I went, let's say, through different points. The first one is the legislation, because without legislation and rule of law, it's quite impossible to invest. But keeping in mind the vision of considering the region as a whole, even though the legislation is in place in different countries composing the region, we have different legislation. So I think it would be wise to adopt a similar tourism policies in terms of objectives, products, and investments. Also, this leads to the approximation of the legislation. And lately, few governments in our region are talking about Open Balkan initiative, which is a very, in my understanding, is a very positive initiative. Basically, the principle is to emulate or to copy a bit the European Union before we access in EU, or meanwhile, we are negotiating our accession in EU, which means that will allow free movement of people, goods, and capitals within the region. And if I may, I will use the example of Landways, Gazi's company. They know how hard it is for them, especially in high season, to cross border and to, let's say, bring different groups coming from Asia or other continents to visit the entire region. So they find different regulation, they find difficulties in the border, which is not helping in developing tourism in our region. Then a second important aspect is the infrastructure. Every country has a decent, I would say, infrastructure. Like Albania has done a lot of improvements, Serbia has a decent infrastructure, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Kosovo. So, but the main problem is the cross-border infrastructure. This is where I think the region needs to improve and to make the difference. So I think that it is necessary for the governments to focus more and to support the development of international or cross-border infrastructure. I would use an example, reading a book, Prisoners of Geography. Something which impressed me a lot was a metaphor or an example used by the author, which was explaining and defining in a way why the Western European countries were developed in Middle Age time, not only of cultural and other aspects that he was mentioning, but an important aspect was that their rivers were navigable, so their rivers were used has highways for transporting the goods and people, which was allowing these countries to exchange between themselves. I think for us in the Balkans, we have to invest in putting people together and allowing companies and businesses to cross borders. Another important aspect is the financial support. Here in the region, we have present a big number of IFIs, international financial institutions, like EBRD, IB, IFC, KfW, etc. And all of them have in their priorities the support of tourism or support of sectors which are in a way vital to the tourism. So EBRD, IFC, they support also the development of structures like hotels, resorts, but for example, the case of KfW is very crucial and vital because in the last years, they were supporting a lot of energy infrastructure, water supply facilities, and water treatment, which are key elements for developing a sustainable tourism. Apart from IFIs, we have also European banks, which are present in the region. We have Unicredit, we have Intesa Sanpaolo Bank, OTP, Raiffeisen Bank, etc., which means that also, let's say, banks with a bigger capital can support bigger developments. And the good news is that the local banks are growing and they are increasingly supporting investments in tourism sector. Then the last point that I mentioned in this presentation in terms of necessary conditions for developing a tourism and a sustainable or meaningful tourism is the human capital. We all, I travel a lot in the region, and before I was starting to travel in the region, I was getting a bit pessimistic only in Albania because everybody's complaining here that everybody's leaving Albania. Then traveling to Croatia, which is a EU member, and we in Albania, we think they are in a much better position. Then I discovered that they have the same problem. Then traveling to Serbia, same problem again. North Macedonia, Kosovo. So all the countries of the region are facing a brain drain. This is a big problem, which is a common problem, and we need to face it as a region, not as individual countries. The solution is not as individual countries, but the only way we can stop this is to act on a regional level. I think with regards to tourism, it's crucial to start thinking of regional platforms of professional schools and vocational trainings. So with all the developments that are happening in the region, we need to prepare our human resources for that. And another important intervention is the free movement of people within the region. This is if a young person has a desire to leave Tirana or Albania to make his own experience in a different country, why not to offer first the possibility to travel and work in the region? So this is how we can keep people in our region, or vice versa, someone from Serbia. And the excellent example here is the general manager of this hotel is from Belgrade, Alexander. So these are, let's say, the examples which can try to face this brain drain problem that we have in the region. Very quickly, because it was mentioned even previously, but I will mention Albania a bit as a case study based on the points that we have mentioned here. I cannot avoid it being an Albanian. With regards to the legislation, the government has done quite a decent job, I would say a good job, because they have provided by law some incentives to investors to develop the touristic facilities in Albania. So there is a special status law for the 4-star and 5-star hotels, which is providing some tax incentives, meaning that the VAT for accommodation structure is 6%, same for the operation structure, and the tax on profit for the next 10 years, for 10 years for this kind of structure is 0%, which is a good thing, but I will come back later on. I don't think it's important, but it's not enough. What does this mean? It means that if a structure or hotel is at loss, they are not doing profit, then the difference of taxation doesn't make any sense. Better having profit and paying a 10 or 15% tax rather than not having profit and having let's say a 0% tax on profit. But I will explain later how we can support that. The second element, which is a different law, is the law of strategic investor status. So probably this is directed mainly to the foreign investors, but also some strategic investors or big investments from local institutions. What does this bring? This helps with the procedures. We know that bureaucracy is a problem in our region in Albania. It helps with the land consolidation, with assisted infrastructure, and sometimes also use of public assets for strategic investments. And I mean, the details are not necessary. You can find, you will receive the presentation later on. So these are some of the, staying at the Albania case, these are some of the brands and hotels and developments in the last years in Albania. As you see, we are I would say, the fastest developing country in the region. And this is the result of the policies that we are mentioning. But another very important aspect that I wanted to mention, because here we are focused on hotels and resorts, is that thanks to the support of EU and a special agency for supporting the agriculture in Albania, a lot of agritourism and let's say small tourism facilities are being developed thanks to these grants which are provided by EU through a local agriculture development agency. Apart from the structures, we have seen other measures of the government. There are these new developments. We have a new airport north of Albania, which opened this year, and started construction of another airport south of Albania just last month, and different initiatives in terms of ports and marinas. What is needed, what we are, this is also other infrastructure in terms of highways and railway. And then we have a statistic here that in 2020-2021, we had a total 72 permits granted from the governments for hotel developments. These are some of the financing programs which are supporting the development of necessary infrastructure and raising human capacities in Albania. So to conclude, these, let's say, are what we can improve, not only in Albania, but all over the region. First thing, I think, first and very important thing is the connecting infrastructure with neighboring countries. We cannot act as a, let's say, common market or common region without a proper connection, which means improved highways. Especially Albania is poorly connected with railway to the region, And of course, the ports are also very important. Now, going back to what we were mentioning before, in terms of the case of Albania, it is not necessarily only the tax break. I think it's very important the creation of international events. If we are able to create international events to attract more business for hotels, especially in the cities, then we can say that the tax break is also working well. But international events, it might be a very good idea to have like regional festivals and entertainment events, which are rotating all over the region in different countries. What else we can improve is education. As I said, increase investment in hospitality schools and vocational training facilities all over the region and at the regional level, not at the national level. Waste management. This has to do with the, let's say, sustainable and meaningful development of tourism. Here in Albania, we think that this is only an Albanian problem, but the news is that it's not only an Albanian problem. I think even other countries have more or less the same problem. I know in Serbia, for example, they have a program now in investing in water treatment facilities because all the wastewater goes to the rivers, same as in Albania. So this is a very important aspect that the governments has to work, but I think they have to have a vision also of a cooperation with the private sector. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to tackle this problem in a short period. And environmental protection, as it was mentioned even here previously, the biodiversity and the nature, it can be a very important source of tourism. So we have to protect that. And I think we have to have a special focus on environmentally friendly developments. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Besnik, for the positively critical assessment of the situation in the region. And I think we all agree, and I'm hearing that this is a recurring theme and comment, that we have done a lot, but much more needs to be done. And we all agree that we can be very successful on the world stage if we act together by being authentic in what we represent. Thank you. Now, the last keynote speaker for today is a gentleman I've met many, many years ago who came to Albania as the editor of In Your Pocket Guides, which was a New York Times phenomenon when it came out. And I was proudly serving as the editor of Tirana in Your Pocket, Shkodra in Your Pocket, and then I went to North Macedonia and Montenegro and Slovenia, the first edition. The man is called Craig Turp, and I hope I have Craig here.
I am indeed here. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, you hear Craig. And Craig is from UK, but he made Romania his home. He has a love for the region. He is the managing editor of the very prestigious Emerging Europe magazine. And he'll talk about critical assessment of tourism development in the region. I'm very sorry Craig could not come. He even has his ticket still valid, but because of COVID restrictions, he couldn't make it. So we'll miss you, Craig, but we have you over here. So thank you, and the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, everybody. And, I'd just like to begin by, extending my thanks to Ghazi and to Landways International for inviting me to take part in this event, as well as my sincere apologies for not being there in person. And it certainly wasn't a lack of will on my part. I never need much of an excuse to visit the wonderful country of Albania. And as with a number of you, as Ghazi mentioned, I actually owe my first experience of visiting in Albania back in 2005, I think it was, to Ghazi, who really is a one-man tourism promotion agency. But as he mentioned, it's COVID restrictions. Romania, where I live, introduced some ridiculous new rules for travelers arriving from outside the European Union last weekend, which would have left me facing 14 days in quarantine on my return, even though I'm fully vaccinated. And as with Christmas rapidly approaching, it was a risk I was unfortunately not able to take. So Ghazi did a wonderful job of introducing me. My name is Craig Turb. I'm the editor of Emerging Europe. We focus on 23 countries of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe and the South Caucasus. I've been with Emerging Europe for just over 4 years. And before that, again, as Ghazi mentioned, for 2 decades, I was the editor of In Your Pocket, Europe's largest publisher of city travel guides. I've also authored a number of travel books for numerous other publishers. So I do like to think that travel, particularly in this particular region, is something that I'm at least relatively qualified to talk about. There are 2 main threads to this talk, the theme of which is to take a critical look at tourism in the Western Balkans. And they're actually, 2 things which have, already been mentioned, but I'm going to take them a little bit further, and they are regional cooperation and infrastructure. And the 2, in my opinion, and I would stress that, all of this is just opinion, go hand in hand, because both are crucial to the development of tourism in the region. So let me start by saying that, I believe the Western Balkans gets a lot right when it comes to tourism. I think that, the tourism leaders throughout what, we as an organization call Emerging Europe, as a whole, they remain what we might call the grand cities of the old empires, which still very much leverage and benefit from that imperial heritage. I'm talking about Prague, Budapest, Krakow in particular. But places like that face a challenge, which is that they are often viewed by travelers as one-time destinations. They're places which you tick off and then you don't worry about them again. And the main challenge for these places is now to try and convince travelers that they're worth repeat visits. And what I've noticed in the Western Balkans, certainly in recent years, is that tourism promotion has largely articulated a clear, what I would call values-driven approach, as opposed to an attraction-driven approach. The Western Balkans are clean, they're green, they're sustainable. It's all about the experience. And I think this is a commendable approach which needs to continue. That said, promotion efforts can sometimes be slightly fuzzy about their goals. Do they want to introduce a destination, attract higher numbers of tourists generally, or perhaps craft a certain type of image or value about a place that might attract a certain type of traveler? And I think it's important that everyone involved agrees on what these goals are. And they need to be region-wide, and this is where the element of regional cooperation comes in. Now, I know that, none of you came here, this evening for a history lesson, but, the Western Balkans has so much history that it's difficult not to bring it up, even when we're talking about tourism. Indeed, the region's history is actually one of the reasons that travelers are attracted to the region. The subject of borders in the Western Balkans has for centuries been, a Pandora's box of, grief, if you like. The current status quo is the result of, war, negotiation, more negotiation, it goes on. And the situation today is still far from settled. Kosovo's status as an independent country remains a subject of dispute between, that young country and Serbia, which continues to view Kosovo as its province, while, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a lack of cooperation between its 2 entities, the Republic of Srpska and the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, continues to hamper that country's development. So any talk of, borders in the Western Balkans is usually met with disdain across the region, across Europe, across the world as a whole, which is why it's so encouraging that in recent months, moves have been made in entirely a a different direction, which is doing away with the region's borders entirely. I think many of you will probably know that Kosovo and Albania in June, I believe it was, struck a deal that means Albanians, should they wish to do so, can now, live, study and work in Kosovo, while Kosovars are likewise able to live and study in Albania. And perhaps most importantly, there's been, this movement in recent months by the leaders of Albania, Serbia and North Macedonia to push forward with the border-free initiative, which Besnik, mentioned in his talk. It was previously dubbed mini Schengen, but it now, appears to officially be known as Open Balkans. And Open Balkans will, if implemented as planned, see the elimination of, sometimes long and tedious waits for travelers at borders and the end of complicated work for companies by, I think the current plan is by the end of 2023. Now, as somebody who spent a number of weeks this summer traveling across the region, I think I crossed 8 borders in all. This move is obviously welcome, and it's a great signal that the will is there to create this regional cooperation that, I believe is so necessary to improve the traveler's experience. But I think it's also important to point out that it will not solve all of the issues met by those of us who, enjoy Balkan road trips, because it's not actually the main problem. For example, crossing from Bulgaria into North Macedonia was very easy, as was North Macedonia into Albania, Montenegro into Serbia. And in fact, the longest wait that I had on my trip was the border from Serbia into Bulgaria. I think I waited 2 hours, although I have to admit my timing wasn't ideal, because I seem to have arrived exactly the same time as half of Germany's Turkish community, who appeared to be traveling home for the summer holidays. There's also the issue that the Open Balkans, as welcome as it is, cannot fully succeed without the region as a whole. And unfortunately, although, initially included in talks on the initiative, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro and Kosovo have so far chosen not to take part, each for very, very different reasons. Neither will Open Balkans fully succeed without better infrastructure, which is, the kind of next topic, if you like. And again, I know that Besnik mentioned this, but, I want to take it a little further, because although doing away with borders would unquestionably be a positive move, the main problem when it comes to traveling around the Western Balkans is not in fact the borders, it's the infrastructure, or rather, the lack of it, and particularly the inter-regional infrastructure. Traffic on, Albania's, Montenegro's roads is particularly troublesome during the summer season, and, hours can be wasted crawling along, the single carriageways. And it's, currently a serious impediment to the desire of both countries to become tourism hotspots. I think it was Richard who said in his talk that, visitors are unlikely to become advocates for a destination if they have a bad experience. And certainly sitting in traffic is one of the worst experiences a traveler can have. And something that it's vitally important to remember, I think, particularly when it comes to, travel in the Western Balkans, is that many visitors to the region will be looking to visit more than one country. They may begin their trip in Tirana, but they may also have plans to visit Montenegro, the coast, or Skopje perhaps, or Sarajevo, or Belgrade. On my own travels this year, I passed underneath the as yet complete and now, almost infamous motorway currently under construction in Montenegro that, should eventually link the country's popular, coastal towns and resorts with Serbia. I think, work began back in 2014, I think, with a loan from the Chinese government, also almost worth 1 billion euros. And the first section of the motorway was originally due, I believe, to be complete in 2019, but, it's been delayed, and the COVID pandemic has obviously not helped, and it's pushed the deadline back. In the meantime, Montenegro's government has actually been forced to turn to the European Union to put together a deal with Western banks to help Podgorica, hedge its repayments to China, which as a result of the loan for the motorway now holds, 1/4, I think, of Montenegro's foreign debt. Now, Montenegro, because of its reliance on tourism, saw its economy shrink by, I think it was just over 15% in 2020. It was one of the sharpest contractions in all of Europe, because the pandemic cut off tourism, which was its main source of revenue. But as I witnessed this summer, the tourists have returned, not just to Montenegro, but across the region. And the GDP figures that I think we will see come out in January, will reflect this. I think that once again, we're going in the right direction. But to secure the further growth that not just, Montenegro or Albania, but the whole region needs, we need more infrastructure to facilitate the movement of people around the region, which will be made easier by Open Balkans. But, I again want to reiterate, the earlier point. The Open Balkans should not be seen as a cure for all the region's problems. Open borders only work when there is sufficient infrastructure in place that allows everyone, tourists, locals, businesses, to make the most of them. And I think it's also important to point out that when it comes to infrastructure, it's not just motorways. It mustn't just be motorways. Dr. Alt, spoke eloquently in his talk about the threat of climate change to the region. And unfortunately, there are currently very few alternatives to the roads. The railways of the former Yugoslavia and Albania have been badly neglected for the past 30 years and, need to be rejuvenated. They need to become a sustainable, attractive option for travelers without their own transport to get around the region and not just to and from the region. And I say that because, in a few years, I think 4 or 5 years, if construction continues as planned, travelers will be able to take a high-speed train from Belgrade to Budapest. But what about Belgrade to Sarajevo, or Belgrade to Skopje, or Podgorica to Durrës? Last month, we were, obviously all horrified by the bus crash in Bulgaria, in which, many people died, mainly from North Macedonia. And while, the crash was unusual in its scale, it does need to be said that, the number of road accidents in the Western Balkans region is far higher than the European average. And, you can put that down, perhaps in part to driver error, but, the poor infrastructure also plays a role. Now, just last week, the European Union revealed an international sustainable infrastructure plan, which they've called Global Gateway, which aims to mobilize 300 billion euros in public and private infrastructure investment by 2027. There was no mention of China's Belt and Road Initiative in the announcement, but the plan is already being viewed as a European effort to challenge the Belt and Road, which was launched in 2013 to fund infrastructure projects in emerging economies, but which, many of its critics say traps recipients in debt. And, Montenegro's experience is perhaps evidence of that. So the Western Balkans should right now be looking at how they can tap this EU Global Gateway funding to improve their infrastructure and to make tourism more sustainable and more attractive, because the potential is there. The region is unquestionably stunning. It offers everything a traveler could wish for. You have the fabulous beaches, the hidden bays, the mountains, the lakes, the ski resorts, the history, perhaps even too much history, and hospitality, which is, unrivaled anywhere else in Europe. And as, Ghazi, as you told me in a chat we had recently, in these somewhat strange times, it's a great time to be able to play the hospitality card. So, in conclusion, the two takeaways that I would ask everyone to, to leave with, if you like, are these. I think firstly, tourism in the Western Balkans will only reach its full potential when the political issues that still affect the region are, if not perhaps fully resolved, at least overcome, and all of the region works together. And, I want to give an example here of why this is so important. At Emerging Europe, we last week published a an article about skiing destinations in Central and Eastern Europe, focusing on the fact that ski passes, the lift passes, are now so expensive in many Western European resorts that, you know, families especially are struggling to afford them. In the Balkans and in Eastern Europe, they're far cheaper. In Kapalnik in Serbia, I believe that a week ski pass costs just over 50 euros. Now that's less than it costs for one day skiing in most Western European resorts. And Kapalnik is a well-developed resort that's been very carefully planned and has a modern network of ski lifts, and it really is the gold standard for the region. I know that Montenegro is developing Kolashin. You know, there's also some good skiing in the vicinity of Sarajevo. But, you know, coming from someone who has, you know, been skiing for 40 years, trust me, you know, Kapalnik is currently the gold standard for the region. You know, it really is in a different league. But, and there's a huge but, for foreign visitors, there's a problem with Kapalnik. It's over 4 hours from Belgrade and almost 6 hours from Podgorica. Now, in an ideal world, the main airport serving Kapalnik would in fact be Pristina, which is only just over 2 hours away. This would be good for Kosovo and it would be good for Serbia. But as I'm sure you all know, foreigners are not allowed to enter Serbia directly from Kosovo. Indeed, if you look at Google Maps and you set a route from Pristina to Kapalnik, it actually tells you that the journey is going to take over 6 hours because it takes you through Montenegro. So that's just one example of why, you know, the development of tourism in the Western Balkans, certainly to its full potential, relies so heavily on regional cooperation and the, you know, overcoming these various political disputes. The second takeaway, you know, is infrastructure. And what's most important to remember here is that we also need to have a cross-regional mindset. Infrastructure should be planned and constructed with crossing those hopefully soon to disappear borders in mind and crossing them sustainably. This means Albania looking, you know, connecting far better with Montenegro, Montenegro connecting with Bosnia, Bosnia with Croatia, Serbia connecting with just about everyone, you know. And I know it, you know, it might sound as though what I'm advocating for here is kind of the reconstruction of Yugoslavia, if you like, you know, and I'm not. Trust me, you know, certainly not politically. You know, these are all independent countries who won their independence with a great deal of sacrifice in most cases. But when it comes to infrastructure, for the good of the whole region, for tourism, it does need to be viewed as a whole. You know, there needs to be this cross-regional cooperation. And what I see now are lots of individual projects, many of them very, very good projects, you know, some great national tourism strategies, not least Albania. But these need to be knitted together to form a coherent package, a network, if you like. And, you know, if the EU's Global Gateway Initiative proves to be even half as impressive as promised, then the money is going to be there to make this happen. And it's my impression, you know, certainly from, you know, speaking to people who I know in the industry and, you know, even listening to, you know, some of the speakers we've had today, the private sector knows this. And I think it's now time for the public sector to follow the private sector's lead and to get on board. Because by working together, the Western Balkans can offer a vacation that, well, it will be hard to beat. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Greg, and thank you for the coverage. And you made me feel like I was physically walking through the streets of Prague, of Tirana, of Belgrade, of Pristina. And I think you were an embodiment of the fact that the best leadership style is by storytelling. And I think by profession, being a journalist, you just justify it. Now, a philosophy of this group of people here in the audience is that we don't see it as a division of labor, where we talk and you listen. Well, you were a great audience today because you came on time, you guys took notes, and you very actively listened to what you said. And I counted, it's a record today that the mobile phone rang only twice today, which is a record for Albania. So I think that's quite an improvement. Now, I know that I'm standing between you and cocktail, which is waiting outside this conference hall. But for the respect of the audience, and I think I ask the agreement of all the keynote speakers, we'll take 3 or 4 quick questions for the keynote speakers, for the panel. So I open the floor. Please, very brief questions and brief answers. Yes, there's a question here. Urdina, I think you have the microphone over there.
I have a question for any of you. I don't know, whoever. Do you see any relationship between tourism development or tourism in general and brain drain?
Yeah. Non-academic style, please.
Maybe, yeah, short answer. Yes, of course, there is a relation. And for instance, in the case where rural tourism was mentioned and mountains tourism was mentioned, so one reason for people to run away is that the place is boring for young people especially, and that there are no jobs, no attractive jobs. So if you can develop tourism not only on the coast, which is of course important, yes, no doubt about it. I mean, I'm not saying black or white, one or the other, but if you can bring tourism development also to new areas, to rural areas, this also creates for the people living there, also for the young people living there, A, jobs, and B, also some more entertainment in having tourists coming there. So which will help people the brain drain first from the rural areas to the cities, and then also thereby also from the country to outside. So the more interesting, good, well-paid jobs with a career ladder that you can not only stay a cleaning woman or a waiter for 20 years, but there's a career involved, is attractive then to stay here. So that maybe if you go to work in Greece or in Germany as a waiter, maybe you earn more money, but probably you will never make a career. You will stay a waiter. So if you can have a clear structure, and there was, you mentioned we need training, and of course, well, don't, we will be surprised that I fully support this, as education is of course very, very important. So if you offer good training and you offer good jobs, this will of course be then making it more attractive for people to stay here. And that is of course the very, very important one. And this is necessary. Otherwise, when we talk about quality tourism and we talk about hospitality, if there's nobody there to serve the tourists, all this comes to nothing.
A short addition to Wolfgang's answer. There are 2 perspectives of this. One is the personal perspective and one is the economic perspective. From an economic perspective, tourism provides evidence that it can avoid brain drain. One little example is the Swiss village of Andermatt, where it used to be a military station, and then the military went out, and the local people in Andermatt did not have any perspective, not any. Then Sami Saviris came, or Rascom, and developed Andermatt as a resort. Many people made their jokes about it because Andermatt was in the Swiss society, had that image, military station. Many people made their jokes. Sami Saviris could stand in there, and now they are basically selling, developing these residential units, which is not at all, it has some pitfalls to it, residential units, but that's a different discussion. But the local people of Andermatt now say that was our lifesaver. That's the personal, the economic perception. The personal perception is tourism is the biggest industry in the world, used to be pre-COVID, will be, to my understanding, someday post-COVID again. It creates perspectives no other industry can create if you work on yourself. And I'm an example as well. I grew up in a rural area. My parents had hotels and things like this. So I thought if I have no other idea, I go into that hotel business of my parents. And then suddenly I decided the hotel industry could be my opportunity to see the world. And I moved on in further education. And I'm quite happy with this. My parents weren't because I disappeared, but I'm quite happy how things turned out for me. So this is the personal also aspect of development and conquering brain drain.
No, I add only a sentence or a couple of sentences. Not only helps with the brain drain, but helps with the brain gain. And Albania is one of the best examples. I know foreign people which are living in Albania, they emphasize how good our restaurants are. But the secret is that great number of these chefs were living for many years in Italy or Greece, and they came back in the service industry and tourism industry contribute. So I think not only stops the brain drain, but it helps also on the brain gain.
I would like to jump in with a few comments. And I think like in every product, it all depends how attractive is the product. So tourism being a product in itself and all the elements, how attractive is it? The second thing is whether these people who leave or come back like brain gain or brain drain, whether they find a passion. And the third, which is very important, is what is the working environment of a company? And I'll give two examples. Landways International, we had international people coming to work for us, although we're not paying the highest buck because of the environment, and they had the opportunity to talk to Wolfgang, to Besnik, to Richard, to different professors. We had a big event, the Dean of IMD Lausanne, together with Besnik's Foundation. All these opportunities give people a different boost. And I want to end my comment with the fact that you, Rodina, today told me one thing. When we entered the hotel, you said to me, this doesn't seem like in Albania. And this is Movenpick. It is because it's a place of love. It's a place where everybody, even the owner, want to contribute, the top management, everybody wants to create an experience. So I think we all can create it. We all can contribute. And the last word is by sharing great experiences. So tonight is such an experience where 26 nations are getting together to talk about insights about tourism, how to give it more hope, and to show that life has not stopped. Thank you. Well, Greg, if you have any comment or then one more question, and then I think we will wrap it up.
Okay, please.
Well, let me be more democratic. Do you have somebody else who would like to make a point? Well, okay, then please.
Please, Greg, do you think these young sustainable startups will be a key for the meaningful tourism? We see a lot of young startups which are resulting very much sustainable, and they are, let's say, they are playing a key role nowadays in our society, let's say, in Albanian society and in the region as well, Kosovo, Macedonia, etc.
That's exactly it. I think that young sustainable startups are not just crucial in tourism. I think they're crucial in every single sector. You know, I think that that's exactly where.
Craigie, if you just can put the mic, please. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, so I'll start again. I think that young sustainable startups are, you know, crucial, not just in the tourism sector, but in every sector. You know, I think that they are the future. I think that that's exactly where we should be, you know, investing. I think that's exactly where resources should be going. And I think that, you know, if we don't, then, you know, we risk missing out on a big opportunity. And as I say, that applies not just to tourism, it applies to all sectors, because, you know, and I think this is something that we'll cover on the panel tomorrow, but I think it's important that, you know, the Western Balkans, and certainly, you know, all of, you know, Central, Eastern, Southern Europe as a whole, you know, needs to move up the value chain. we need to stop looking at, this region as being a low cost region, whether it's low cost in terms of services, whether it's low cost in terms of labor. And the only way that we can do that is by innovating. So yes, the simple answer to your question is yes.
I believe that the most difficult job is in this chair, because I need to moderate while I'm enjoying the conversations, but I have to pull this time. And I think now my duty asks me to thank all the keynote speakers. I want to thank Her Excellency the Minister, who came and you addressed us in a very meaningful and heartfelt way for her insight and the interest Albanian government is placing on environment first and tourism. Thank you, Richard, for a lesson, I think, which I learned today, and we all learned about the way we should look at the key metrics, because meaningful is more important than raw numbers. Thank you, Wolfgang, for the very deep academic, but at the same time, very practical approach to tourism in this region in general, and your learnings from China and all other markets. Thank you, Besnik, for the very interesting approach about tourism in this region and for the hope you generated, and just saying that we have to do much more. And thank you, Greg, for placing yourself in the position of a guy who has been in the region, a journalist, and a guy who covers matters from politics, geopolitics, economic, and environmental. So I want to thank all of you, and most importantly, the audience, for coming in this rainy day all the way here, for coming and being part of this great gathering. And I invite all of you to celebrate with a cocktail which is outside. A few words for tomorrow. We're starting at 9:30 sharp, and I promise that the day is going to rock tomorrow because the number of speakers and the quality is great. So thank you once again, the keynote speakers, thank you, the audience, and I'll see you in the cocktail.